Javed Ali is a former FBI official and associate professor of practice at the University of Michigan, and he joins me now. Javed, good to have you with us and appreciate you being with us early this morning where you are. Now, the FBI is treating this as a suspected terror attack. So why is this incident being designated as that by the agency?
Well, nice to be with you as well. And so in the aftermath of attacks like this, where it's not exactly clear what the motivation may be behind the attack or the identity of the perpetrator or perpetrators, even though in this case it's one person, a lot of times the FBI will default to the potential for terrorism because the FBI is the lead for counterterrorism in the United States. And then on the ground, then it's a case of the investigation proceeding and the agents and the US attorney working with state and local counterparts to figure out, was this actually an act of terrorism that fits under federal law, either through definitions or charging, or is it a purely criminal act? So it's not surprising to hear that the initial suspicion is terrorism, but it may prove not to be. But this happens routinely in the aftermath of incidents like this.
Yes, I did find it quite interesting because the Boulder police chief was exercising a bit more precaution in terms of the motive, saying it would be irresponsible to establish one this early. So from a local point of view, is that the right call?
Well, there's always this inherent tension in these investigations because they're happening somewhere in the United States. And while the FBI is the lead federal agency for investigating the federal aspect of it and potentially building a federal case if charges are going to be forthcoming. Obviously, it happens in a local jurisdiction. And then again, it's the question of if it's purely criminal, then perhaps the decision is made later, criminal in terms of motivation, perhaps the decision is made later to then hand it off to the state and local officials to run their investigation or charge an individual. But if it's terrorism and there's an ideological motivation behind it, or if there's a group behind it, although I don't think that's the case here, then the FBI would have a responsibility working with the Department of Justice. So it's also not surprising to see that they're sort of different perspectives, but we're still in the early stages of this. And again, it could shift in different directions based on what's found going forward.
Yes. Javed, you were in the FBI. I'm just interested to know, in the background at the moment, do you think, would the agency itself be ramping up investigations to preempt other future similar incidents like this one?
Well, every day across the country, there are thousands of counterterrorism investigations going on in the background. And that's just been the norm in the post 9/11 environment here in the United States. Doesn't mean that all those investigations are equal in terms of size or scope or impact, but still every day, and these are all public figures that have been cited by FBI directors in the past, that there are these investigations going on. But in the aftermath of these high-profile incidents that happened, like the DC attack a couple weeks ago and then the Boulder attack, will the FBI take a heightened focus on these attempted attacks or attacks of anti-Semitic violence? Will there be a task force type structure that comes together to further look into this inside the United States? I mean, these are all possibilities, but I have to imagine that, yes, the FBI is taking these attacks and threats seriously, but every day there are lots of investigations going on throughout the country.
And how political might this entire thing get? Because, we saw the Homeland Security advisor Stephen Miller blaming the immigration system of the previous Biden administration, given as well that the suspect's visa status.
Yeah, this is another interesting development in this case, unlike the one in Washington a couple of weeks ago, where that attacker was, I believe, a U.S. citizen born in the United States. Here we have an immigrant from Egypt who came in legally, but then overstayed his visa and then submitted some kind of asylum petition, was allowed to stay in the country. And just based on the political agenda for President Trump and the immigration enforcement policies that he's been enacting, this is going to be another thing that I suspect is going to make this case very political, because it has features to it that even the Washington, D.C. attack did not.
Yeah, and more broadly, though, we have seen more incidents outside of the U.S. in the Middle East. where, synagogues are attacked. We've had that incident, as you mentioned before, in Washington, D.C. as well. Are these incidents, responses to the brutality of what is happening in Gaza, killings at hospitals, at aid distribution points, not to mention the overall death toll in Gaza exceeding 50,000?
Well, certainly in the aftermath of October 7th, there has been an uptick in radicalization and these violent attacks across the West. Now you have to get into the minds of the people committing the attacks in terms of, what is actually fueling that anger? Is it all boiling down to the events post October 7th? And we all know, what's been happening on the ground in the Gaza Strip, or are there other factors? And that's what makes this type of terrorism very difficult to sort of prevent, because you've got mostly lone individuals operating on their own who aren't part of terrorist groups, who could sort of go from being very radicalized to then acting out violently quickly. And there's never one single thing that drives them. It's always a combination of factors. But certainly in the post-October 7th landscape, this is probably a factor for many people, but it may not be the only factor for several.
Yes, and given that there is a lot of fuel for anger, might more of these incidents, do you expect more of these incidents to occur in the US and elsewhere?
Well, now that we had the Washington, D.C. attack going back from 2 weeks and the Boulder attack, is this now a broader pattern? I mean, these are only 2 incidents. So I would have to suspect the FBI doesn't want to get too far out in front of that. But again, there are probably inside the United States and other countries around the world every day people who are very angry over what's happening overseas in Gaza or in the Gaza Strip. But it doesn't mean they're going to act out violently on it. And so how does law enforcement, or here in inside the U.S., how's the FBI, how do they prevent these types of attacks? Because you're literally trying to get inside the minds of people who are angry, but it's not illegal to be angry in the United States, even over the events in the Gaza Strip. So this is what makes this kind of counterterrorism work very difficult, because it's very hard to prevent these types of attacks before they happen.
Okay, Javed Ali, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for giving us your analysis. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.